Hi, I'm Lucy Stephenson with the Roane County Master Gardeners. I have been a Master Gardener for 1 full year. I started last year in 2020 as an intern, and with the pandemic it was a challenge, but we got through the classes. It's been a great learning experience. We've completed our project with that, and I've met a lot of great people and very interested in for community education, which is education is my background as well as nursing. So I'm happy with being a part of it. This presentation is about elevated square foot gardening. It's a combination of what Mel Bartholomew made sensationalized back in the 70s with some adaptations, and elevated square foot beds, which allow people with disabilities or just ease of gardening so that you don't have to bend over to do your gardening. And we'll talk about how to build a raised elevated bed, as well as what soils to use and how to create your square foot gardening. Hi, I'm Lucy Stephenson with the Master Gardeners of Roane County, and I want to talk to you today about elevated raised beds. Now, this is a little different concept than the raised beds everybody thinks about that are on the ground. This is elevated so that if you had back problems or leg problems, or you're just basically lazy like I am, you can have it elevated. And so this is one I just put together, and I'll show you how I got to this point and where a finished product is. I won't be able to finish this one today, but I'll at least get you going with it. This is a very inexpensive project. You can construct these for under $50. You'll find a lot of ideas on the internet about how to build these, and I've seen them upward to $200. That's using cedar, which is great. It's very durable and very weather resistant. But I skipped that part and went to landscape timbers. Very cheap, also weather resistant, and about the same size as a 4x4 cedar post. Let me go ahead and get started. All right, so the pallets, these are made with pallets, and basically you can get these free. Some businesses have them on the side of the road. Greenhouses is where I got a lot of them. Auto stores that get a lot of heavy-duty equipment coming in. So I've collected several over the years, and this project, you can get it done with one pallet. It's a 4x4 square foot garden that's elevated. And we'll also talk a bit about square foot gardening and how this really lends itself to doing that concept. All right, so the other things you will need besides the landscape timbers and the pallets are some 1x4 slats. They don't have to be really high quality, but they have to be, and they'll be cut down so that, of course, the shorter, the more weight it will bear. And when you consider that a cubic foot of soil weighs about 72 pounds, which is incredible. I found that statistic. We'll talk about the soil that you use in these elevated beds and how you can reduce that weight. Okay. The other things you'll need is landscape fabric and 2x2s, and I'll show you what those are for as well. So we can go ahead and get started. Pallets are heavy, so are landscape timbers. So if you've got a flat surface that you can drop this stuff off and leave it there and work on it there, I think you'll be better off, at least for me it is. So I use portable hand saws, portable drills, portable screwdrivers, everything I try to keep pretty portable. But even with all this, you know, battery life on some of this equipment goes down pretty fast. So I may find myself, once a pallet gets cut down, so a lot of the weight's off, I may take it in the shop and use the radial arm saw. All right, just to give you an idea, I'm not going to actually do this, but just to give you an idea, I've seen a lot of people, when they're building these, go through the trouble of taking out all the nails, which is a real pain because they don't come out easy, and it's really not necessary. So if you get your handsaw and you cut along what I call a pallet bracket, or a pallet spine, or pallet support, these braces that hold the pallet boards together, if you cut as close to that as possible, you'll end up with about an 18-inch strip of wood along these lines. And so that's what I did. I just took the saw and went up that side, took the saw, went up that side, and what that leaves, when you do that on both sides, you get about 24 18-inch pallet, 1x4 pallet boards. The other thing you get are 3 spines, 3 brackets that you can use as support in your bed, and I'll show you how those are used. All right, so once those are cut out, and like I said, you get about a 18-inch board. You'll notice they're also of different widths. Most of them are 4, but the ones at the end are 8 or 6, depending on the pallet. Then I take those and actually cut them in half, and that will be the depth of my bed. And you want your depth of your bed to be around 6 to 8, 9 inches. That'll make it 9 inches, but you're going to lose some of that depth just from getting the support underneath it. Okay, so you get those together. You have your spines that you'll have 3 of them. Well, guess what? You need 4, of course, but you need to get what I did, I cheated a bit. Instead of cutting down another pallet, I just got a 2x2 and used it as the other support. So essentially what you're doing, and you can see from this angle, is you're taking your 1x9s and laying them vertically next to each other. These spines will then be 48 inches long, because these pallets are 3x4. So they're 48 inches long, just perfect. You don't have to cut them down. And then I use the pallet spine to attach the pallet boards to it. And so now you've not got any waste. You're using the whole pallet, and that's pretty handy. Once you get that in, on 2 sides of it, you'll want to put a 2x2. And that will be the support for your soil, and you only need to do it on 2 sides. And basically after that, you'll take these 1x4 pieces of wood and just lay them in and space them about maybe a 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch in between them, to make sure that your water is going to drain out, but close enough to each other so that it supports. Let me tell you about a few lessons learned. When you're putting in these, make sure you put at least 2 nails or screws in per board. At first I thought, well, I'll put one here and a couple here and a couple down there. Not a good idea, because I came out one day and my boards were about down to here. So I jacked it up and inserted more screws and nails in it. Once you get the 1x4s in, then you take your landscape fabric and cover the whole thing. And I use staples to nail it to the edges here. Make sure that it goes down deep so that you have your full 8-inch depth of soil. And then you can fill it with your soil. And then we'll talk a little bit about the square foot gardening after that. But I think that's about it. It's real important too that what you're doing with these landscape timbers is making it solid so that it can withstand the weight of the soil and the water and the plants. Plants are fairly negligible, but the soil and water is a lot. So you're going to put a brace between them. The brace is 48 inches. I just take one of the landscape timbers, cut it in half, and that'll be your braces for both sides. The height of this is 32 inches, so you can get 3 legs out of a 1 by an 8-foot piece of landscape timber. And you may ask, well, okay, you've used up 2 8-foot pieces, where are you going to get that other leg? Unfortunately, you will have to buy another piece of landscape timber to do that, but it's relatively cheap. And then you'll have 2 legs left over for your next project that you want to do. Okay, just to give you some other ideas about elevated or raised beds, this one's not truly considered elevated because you can't slide a chair underneath it, but it is raised enough that you can do maintenance on it without too much energy. These sides do slide down, and it has, so you can get to and do things, but again, you're having to bend over to do this. This is my herb garden. I've got the rosemary and oregano and some basil over here coming up, and it's done well. This is a commercially purchased one. It was really nice to start with. It has a watering system in it that has completely gone defunct. So you just, and it had a raised netting in the back to for your tomatoes and things that get tall that you could tie it to. But it just, and it's pretty old, so it's lasted well enough. But again, it's not really considered an elevated bed. But here's another take on an elevated bed that I want to show you over here. So this is a much simpler method. A lot less energy went into this, and it's got some sentimental value to it as well. This is an old laundry table that my great aunt had at her house, and the legs were cut off on this side of it so that they sat on the porch, and then the long legs sat off the porch, and she could wash her clothes and the water would just run off of them. So I wanted to utilize it, but I also wanted to protect it, even though it had suffered great abuse during her use of it. So I just put a piece of black plastic over it. This, I took the pallet because it will allow the water to drain, and I just put it right on top of the table. That didn't take anything, and so far this, the only thing this cost me, I did purchase the 12-inch by 1-inch sideboards. So this one's a little deeper as well. And I have a lot of varmints up here, so I just took some edging that I'd used on my side gardens to try to keep them out. It's not been real successful. This works the best, just hardware cloth, and you can see what I've got growing here is some lettuce. I've got more lettuce here, some carrots, again with some other hardware cloth on the top, and it pretty well keeps them out. I've got beets in here, spinach, carrots, and 2 different kinds of lettuces, and so it's coming along. This I did the same idea. I didn't have to put the slats in the bottom because that's what the pallet does. So I just put the landscape fabric inside the box and filled it up with soil. Again, a lightweight soil, and you'll notice that this is a little, it's not level, but that's okay. It helps the water drain off. But again, you do have to water these elevated beds a bit more frequently. It would be hard pressed to get a wheelchair or a chair under here because the table was low to start with, but still, you know, if all it takes for weeding is just standing here and picking out some very easily removable weeds, it makes it worth it. Let me know. Okay, this is a finished elevated raised bed. I did this in January. And so let's talk a little bit about the soil. You can see the landscape fabric here is stapled to it. I've got those slats underneath supporting it. They're double supported with nails and screws in the base of it. And what I did was put in, now Mel Bartholomew is the guy who in the 70s popularized square foot gardening. And he had a lot of good ideas, and a lot of people still use those. But there are some ideas that he insisted on that you can kind of take it or leave it. I'm not promoting him necessarily, but he does have some good ideas if you get a chance to read up on it. So one of the things he did, he did a thing called Mel's Mix, and it was a soil mix that he did 3 parts, 1 part vermiculite, 1 part peat moss, and 1 part compost. Well, the vermiculite and compost and peat moss, they're all very light, so it reduces that 72 pound burden of 1 cubic foot of soil down considerably, and so that will allow the slats to support. And so people have issues, I understand, I appreciate, with the peat moss. It's not renewable. You have to, it takes up a whole resource of the earth, and so a lot of people are now using coconut coir and using that instead of the peat moss. Another thing is vermiculite and perlite both have to be mined, so it's another issue that you can get away with. This bed only has peat moss and compost in it. I'm fortunate to have a lot of oak trees around here, so in the fall we scrape them all together and make a big heap of leaves that eventually break down and make some really nice compost that you can see is very, it's perfect soil. And here again I can show, and then once I built this and put the soil in it, then I put newspapers over it and then put the leaf mulch that hadn't broken down on top of it to keep it so that weeds didn't get into it during the winter time. But let's talk a little bit about who does get into it in the winter time. I have squirrels, I have chipmunks, I have all kinds of little critters that even though rabbits can't get up in it, and a lot of people have problems with rabbits, this prevents that. Some people have said, well, it makes just a nice buffet for deer. They can just come over and nibble a bit and then go on without having to break their necks to do it. But I haven't had the problem. I do have plans to fence off this area, maybe. Like I said, I haven't had problems with the deer, so I may just leave it as is. But the squirrels and the chipmunks do get in it. They burrow in it. They leave their little acorns, and that's fine for them, but it does disrupt the root system of the plants. So I'll show you later on how you can protect this from those kind of creatures. So this is a 4x8 garden. What I did is I made 2 4x4s, and instead of putting up so they're 3-sided and they're resting on the brackets, I lowered the support of the landscape timbers so that they actually nestle on top of each other and give added support through the middle. The other thing that the square foot gardening says you just have to have is a visual on separating the square foot. Now, I think in the original book, he says you can use all different kinds of things. I've got vinyl shades, blinds that are 1 inch that make great dividers. And really it just helps you visualize where is the square foot and how many plants you can put in each square foot. And that's important because he plants things much closer together, which eliminates weeding. Here I have some Brussels sprouts that I've actually put probably about 6 to 9 in a square, and very little weeds. If I can just keep the little animals out, these would be doing fine. Here I've got some chard. I'm just waiting till the weeds get a little bigger so I can identify a weed versus the chard. And they do well with 4 in a square. I've got some tomatoes here that I'm going to plant, and one tomato per square. For the tomatoes that are indeterminate, they get pretty tall, and so what I'm going to do is called a Florida weave, where you put a pole at the end of each of the bed, and then you just weave rope or baling twine, whatever you have, in between so that you're holding up the tomatoes. That way they'll stay upright. The other thought I have, and I may do, is just let them go over the side and give the rabbits a real treat. No, I just want to be able to support them if I can, but not get too worried if they topple over. Okay, so we can go ahead and show you how easy this is to plant up. You don't really even need a shovel. Okay, these are the vinyl curtain or blinds. Mine were vertical, so I can cut off the length of them what I need. I'm actually going to use these on the bed that I just created, but you can get an idea, if this is a 4-foot section, how you can weave them together. Like so. You can just like weave in here and then cut them at whatever length you want them, and then staple them to the sides of the bed. And that gives you an idea about where to put your vegetables. There are lots of resources on the internet about what I was a little concerned about, how deep roots get. Vegetables that have deep roots would not do well in this. You couldn't do potatoes in here, for instance, because they, of course, do all their growth below. And so you get the idea here. Let's see, I want to go. And you can alternate the weave on this. Let me just show you this, and we'll plant a couple of tomatoes, again, just to show you how friable this soil is. Feels like 2. These are very substantial. The other thing that you may notice down here is I just used dividers for a French window. So again, you can use whatever you want to show the divisions. Okay, so I've got some wonderful tomatoes that grew from seed. And we'll just put a few of these in the ground. And again, you don't even need a shovel. You can just dig down deep and mound up good, and then water that really well, and that'll be wonderful. We talked about watering. The other nice thing about square foot gardening is that you really only have to use, when you're first planting, you need to make sure it's nice and wet, but as the week goes on, you can get a solo cup or just put 1 cup per square, and that'll keep your plants well hydrated. The other thing about an elevated raised bed, though, is because it is elevated, they dry out quicker. You get air circulation underneath, which is great for ventilation, but you may need to water more frequently. But it's very simple to water. And then if you want, you can just, I've got plenty of leaf mulch around. You can just put that around that and keep the moisture in a little bit better. And you can put your companion plants around here. Marigolds are great to use with tomatoes. And there you go. So you can make a whole row of those and be well into tomatoes. We've discussed the method of building elevated raised bed gardening, how to build them, the cost of them, and how to use the square foot garden method to raise your vegetables and herbs. We understand that the usefulness of them is not limited to just those that don't want to bend over to garden, but also for those with disabilities. It's wheelchair accessible as well as just a regular chair that you can slide under the beds to tend to your garden. We also discussed the use of the square foot garden method and how the soil that you use in that, as well as the simple design of that in order to keep track of where your plants are. You're welcome to use this design to build your elevated bed, but the internet has loads of resources for it as well. Please feel free to ask any questions, and thank you for your time. Thanks.